2020 looked to be the year of e-commerce. With COVID-19 pandemic and some countries in lockdown, consumer adoption of e-commerce has soared. This has seen the expansion of e-commerce players into new areas of financial services as well. Brad Carr is the Managing Director of Digital Finance at the Institute of International Finance. Will moderate a panel of e-commerce and payments experts to find out what we can expect in the coming year. Joining him will be Amrish, Chief Executive Officer of Pine Labs, Rapyd's co-founder and CEO, Arik Shtilman, Rachmat Kaimuddin, Chief Executive Officer of Bukalapak, and Paidy's founder and executive chairman, Cummer. Let's go over now to Brad and his panel for this discussion of e-commerce of everything.
Welcome, both in Singapore and across the world, and I hope you're keeping safe and healthy. A big part of the story of 2020 and our adaptation to the circumstances of the pandemic has been in the rapid acceleration of digitalisation and e-commerce adoption, and we have a great discussion ahead for you on this topic. I'm Brad Carr, I'm the Managing Director of Digital Finance at the IF in Washington, and it's my privilege to come along for the ride today with 4 experts on this field. And indeed, our expert panellists are central players in the areas of innovative payments and the e-commerce space, but they've actually approached this field from quite diverse backgrounds, some previously in tech, others previously in banking. If I can introduce our 4 expert panellists, Amrish is the CEO of Pine Labs. Amrish is a veteran of innovative payments. He was a co-founder of Citrus Payment Solutions and CEO of Paidy India and First Data Merchant Solutions. Arik Shtilman is the co-founder and CEO of Rapyd, the major cardless financial network. Rapyd. Arik is a serial innovator. He previously founded IT Navigator, and he joins us from Israel. Cummer is the founder and executive chairman of Paidy. Russell has been leading Paidy now for 12 years, having previously been at Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch, and he joins us today from Tokyo. And Rachmat Kaimuddin is the CEO of Bukalapak in Indonesia, having moved from his previous role in banking, where he led finance at PT Bank Bukalapak. There's a lot we can cover. We're going to step through 4 themes, namely the trends of the year, technology's role as an enabler, how e-commerce interacts and intersects perhaps with other or traditional commerce, and also some of the cross-border challenges in data rules and fragmentation. So I think that's enough from me. Let's jump straight in. And Russell, I'm going to start with you as we look at the trends of the year. What have been the most noteworthy shifts in consumer behaviours this year in your mind, and which of those shifts will endure?
Yeah, well, thanks, Brad, for hosting, and great to meet everybody else on the panel, and obviously to SFF, again, very gratified to have been invited. So thanks everywhere where thanks are due. So yeah, I think great question. Look, as everyone knows, obviously we've lived through COVID, and we're still not out of the woods there yet, but it seems that we're getting there. So I think what we've seen in Japan, and just so we're clear, Paidy is a sort of a buy now, pay later solution for Japan. Japan has some interesting idiosyncratic aspects to it, not just in e-commerce, but overall in general. And I think what we've seen in Japan is from minutiae as much as, let's say, the government starting to really encourage businesses to not require physical stamps on contracts to get things done, to people shopping online and really preferring to transact with payment methods that maybe don't require them to use cash or interact with delivery people. I think that's, at least in exactly the domain where Paidy plays, that's really this shift that we've seen. So I think that basically through the year, we've seen a sort of an acceleration at the pace at which e-commerce is penetrating all of our lives, because of basically this reluctance to do as much commerce in the physical world. And then even within the context of e-commerce, Japan historically has been very interesting in that there are penetration of credit cards in Japan is really high, 3.2 cards per person, but still nearly half of e-commerce is actually cash settled. So cash on delivery or convenience store payment, bank transfers. It's remarkable, right? It's not that people are unbanked. It's not that they're uncarded. It's literally that there's this cash habit that has persisted. And I think that basically, these big trends away from historical norms of behavior, I think we're seeing in our business, which is that basically people are trying to, to shift to cashless and digital payments. One, because they're shopping online, but two, also because compared to something like cash on delivery, where you have to have this socially proximate, if you'll allow me to use that as an antonym for socially distant, socially proximate interaction with a delivery person. So, same as everywhere else, I think, people are shifting much more to online, but I think they're also being a little bit more cognizant of the way that they're choosing to pay in the context of all of the challenges this year through Corona, if that makes sense.
It's a really interesting point, Russell, and I think while we do see a global trend away from cash payments, the hygiene issues that have been a concern, mirroring some of the growth of Alibaba that came at the time of the SARS crisis, there are these different local nuances that you allude to there, and Japan is quite a fascinating market. It's almost sort of bimodal in payments, where there are some of the most advanced things happening, but still at the same time such a cash-heavy economy.
Yeah, it's a remarkable juxtaposition. In many ways, it feels developed, and in many others, it feels emerging. So that's why it's fun. Great place to build a business.
Rachmat, if I can continue with you and perhaps get a perspective from Indonesia, but interested in what shifts you've seen in consumer preferences and priorities, and what's really stood out for you this year.
Yeah. So thank you, Brad, and thank you, everyone. So basically, for us, Bukalapak is actually an e-commerce platform with two main services. One is the online marketplace, which kind of the rage, like everyone seems to think that everyone is shifting online. But we also have what we call O2O application. Basically, what we are doing is we are digitizing the millions of mom and pop kiosks in Indonesia. And like Japan, Indonesia is actually, being emerging market country, is still very cash heavy. So on the shift of the consumer preference that we've seen in Indonesia, I think the key driver is, of course, pandemic, right? Which makes people, I think there are three key things. One is what I call health-centric. People care about their health much more. Home-centric. They spend much more time in and around their home. And of course, because of recession, they're looking for value for money purchases. So there are things that they stop or delay purchasing, and maybe they're looking for cheaper price goods. And yeah, so we've seen that trend in the spending. So like stuff like vitamins or personal care products is actually going up. Things like that support work and fun at home, like video games, office equipment is also increasing, and people spend smaller market size in their spending. And also, this is not only on online. Interestingly, we also see the increase on the purchase in the mom and pop kiosk. Maybe they don't want to go to the supermarket, but they actually start buying stuff also in their neighborhood stores. So those are what we've seen in Indonesia.
Some really interesting observations, and while I think to people around the world, some of the points of the health-centric and home-centric approaches probably resonate, your point you make about the mum and pop shops and the kiosks, I think is a really fascinating one that a lot of us in other places are probably not so familiar with. I do want to return and pick that up with you a little bit further later in the conversation. Arik, if I can turn to you, and we've talked a bit about consumer preferences, but maybe if we could flip this over a bit and look at it from the business's side. What have you noticed most within businesses in terms of the speed with which companies are able to get new technologies to market?
Well, that's a great question. An obvious and most positive impact of the pandemic is the overall digitalization of businesses of all sizes. It doesn't matter if you're small, medium, large, and it's actually across all industries, right? It started from any supermarket or any large retailer and went all the way down to the smallest mom and pop shop that basically understood that without the digitalization, they will be out of business. Specifically, for e-commerce, going online and starting, an e-commerce company has never been easier these days. And it's mainly thanks to the global platforms like Shopify, WooCommerce, Wix, Magento, and others, right? All these shopping cart platforms basically enable companies to build their online presence in a matter of hours or days. And it became a much simpler thing to basically take yourself online. Through the power of the global platforms, company can operate their business digitally and solve most of their needs. In some cases, the digitalization looks different from what we expected it to see. However, while the rest of the world is becoming simpler, if you look into payments, it's actually the opposite. As consumers shifted away from cash towards digital payments, the brands they choose are extremely fragmented and localized. There's no common denominator, that is able to connect all countries. People in Indonesia pay with bank transfer and mobile wallets. In India, with UPI payments. In other countries like Singapore, with local real-time networks like Pay Now. So the world is becoming very diversified from a payment perspective. And on the other hand, the simplicity of going and taking your business online is becoming simpler and simpler every day. You can actually take your business online in an hour sometimes. And I think payments need to become as simpler as going online. And still, in the majority of the countries, it's not that simple. But at the end of the day, companies are able to take new technologies to market dramatically faster today than they were before the pandemic.
It's a great couple of points you make there, and it's really interesting to see this conundrum of increased simplicity but increased complexity in different directions, and I hope we can pick that up a little bit further as we continue. Amrish, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now, and I'll do so initially with a very broad and open question for you. What's really stood out for you most this year?
I think just from the business that we do, what has stood out most is the rise of contactless payments. Contactless payments have really exploded all around the world. Everybody just wants to flash their card and make the payment transaction. The other big thing in contactless is also rise of QR. QR generally was much more in the Chinese market, but what we have seen is even Indian consumers have started to move towards QR. Singapore, we are already getting to see QR being accepted a lot more. And that's because people see QR as the preferred contactless choice. The third piece to it is, I don't think so the old world networks like Visa and Master are going to remain behind, and they're going to accelerate when it comes to tokenization and tokenization of cards, because I think consumer sees tokenized card using an Apple wallet or a Samsung wallet as a form of contactless payment. So contactless payment did extremely well in this year, and it's accelerated around the world. So that's one. The second thing, which I find very interesting, is how money is moving in country. So when you look at money, when it moves in, let's say, Singapore or even in India, money is moving faster than messages. So it's like me sending message to somebody else and money moves from one person to another. So this whole trend of faster payments, which is coming up in Singapore and now Philippines, and of course, Australia has been there at it. India has done that successful. I think all of that is going to get accelerated over the next 12 months because people realize through this pandemic, people want to move money faster. They want to move money from their homes and they want to move it as they send out messages.
I think it's a really interesting point about contactless, and I'm glad you highlight that because it's probably one of the areas where the public policy response in the early stages of the pandemic was, I think, very strong. We saw very quickly quite a number of countries double their contactless payments limits. Admittedly, in Europe, it was probably coming off quite a low base in terms of contactless limits, but Hungary and Croatia and the UK quickly doubled. Australia, I think it had been an entrenched behaviour, and in the US, it's become a remarkably common way of paying through the course of the year. Let's move to talk a little more about technology in its role as an enabler. And Rachmat, I want to start with you. And we may be able to pick up perhaps a little on some of what you've already alluded to. But from your perspective, what are the key tools and technologies that you think that are most important for small businesses, those small businesses that have been suddenly transitioning or trying to reinvent themselves this year as e-commerce businesses?
Yeah, so basically, I think the key point is for the small businesses to have the place to sell. And if you're doing this kind of e-commerce, there's a few things that you need to have. One is the platform itself, where you can put your stuff and whatnot, and of course, payment and logistic. Those are the critical tools. And I would say we are talking about online marketplace, at least in Indonesia, and this has been around for a long time, in years. So on that note, basically, the idea is just educating people to use that platform. I think the payment is there, already embedded, the logistic is already embedded. So it's about getting people to use them. And I think Indonesia has been pushing this. All the e-commerce and the government is pushing the small and medium enterprises to use it, educating people. So millions of new small and medium businesses are actually getting online. The problem that we see also is that the only thing is that if you are still working in the cash society, like there's a lot of people in the outside commercial centers that still doesn't have that choice to pay using digital currency, which is the requirement for online marketplace. So this is what I think in Bukalapak we are trying to do, is that we are digitizing the mom and pop kiosks. So they actually have it's kind of like a bridge between the digital and the physical world, or the social proximity. So that now that they are kind of connected into that. So yeah, those are the kind of tools that we are providing.
I really like the point you make about educating people to use the tools, and I wonder if we could just dwell on this for a moment. You know, I think often about a great quote about 18 months ago that Megan Green, a prominent Harvard economist, made, that historically, whenever there's been a new technology innovation, it's taken a long, long time to show up in productivity data. In the case of the PC, she cited that it took 25 years. Because of the human factor, because of the fact that humans take time to learn and adopt and get comfortable with and know how to properly use a new technology. And I wonder whether this year has somewhat broken that nexus, that just the fact that we've been forced to learn to use a lot of the things that technologies like video conferencing that's been there for years and not really been adopted until suddenly we've had to. In that sense, you know, do you think, I don't mean to be looking for silver linings here, but is one of the consequences of this year that perhaps that impetus to educate people has been assisted along or accelerated by the fact that people have had to?
Absolutely. I think that is maybe if there's one silver lining of this pandemic, is that I think everyone is shifting and they don't think of that as say e-commerce as an alternative. I think omni-channel is a requirement now, and they are forced to do it, and I think they started to get benefit from it. Yeah. One thing I can share is, you know, like Indonesia GDP is actually dropping for the past 2 quarters, but if you look at in 2020, the GMV basically, or the value of e-commerce economy, is actually grow 50%. So this is I think you know, the data that shows that people are actually moving towards online.
Amrish, if I can come back to you, and specifically on the payment side, what's most important for enabling small business merchants? Amrish, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I think the part which we've seen very interesting is growth of credit and understanding of credit. When it comes to small merchants, these small merchants don't understand credit. Credit is a very unknown concept to them. They also find credit to be extremely expensive. So how credit can impact their businesses and help them do commerce better, I think all of that is very, very new for small businesses and small merchants. They also find it difficult to understand how credit could impact the consumer's behavior and how consumer wants to procure. And in this pandemic and in the last 12 months, what we have seen is pay later solutions have actually done extremely well for the consumer. Let me give you some statistics on it. Just on our platform, and we cover about 95% of all pay later transactions in the offline world in India. Our volumes have actually grown by about 80% year on year just for pay later. And this has grown actually in the rural markets of India and not in your classic malls and large format retailers. So small merchants have greatly benefited because of the pay later program. The second part, which is very interesting, is access to small credit for working capital or procurement financing or trade financing is something which is very important for the merchant, and merchant has started to understand that it's not too expensive to run their businesses by utilizing some of these credit lines which are available to them. So I think credit has played a very important role for small merchants.
Russell, We've talked a bit here about both payments and about credit, but of course each of those things are intrinsically linked to data. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the role of data as a key enabler and perhaps the specific technologies that are most important for getting the greatest value out of data.
Yeah, sure. So I think actually that Amrish makes a great point. So obviously, again, our experience in Japan, we're a buy now, pay later solution in Japan. And actually, a big part of what we do, I think the point that I would want to make about data is actually, I wouldn't be fixated on any particular technology. I think it's more about what is data for, and it's actually for creating these new consumer experiences, right? So in some sense, we're talking about these new habits, the new things that people want to do. And I think for me, our emphasis, at least as Paidy, has always been on using data in a way that's abstracted away from a consumer in order to create this instant experience that people want. So if you'll allow me 2 minutes or 15 seconds to explain, Paidy basically allows anyone in Japan to shop at roughly 500,000 websites using only their email address and phone number. They don't sign up for Paidy, they don't download anything. We instantly underwrite that transaction and then basically create this consolidated payment method for them. They can shop at all of these different websites, and we do a monthly consolidated billing cycle. So we send them an SMS at the beginning of the next month, and they go and pay at a convenience store or by bank transfer. They can link their bank account for all of the purchases that they've made. And the reason that we do that is we want the consumer experience to be as easy as using cash on delivery at checkout, but to be as powerful as a card every moment thereafter. So you can imagine there's a huge reliance on data to do that. But what you don't want to do is create any friction for the consumer. So what I would say is not necessarily so much about what enabling technology or how you approach it, but actually this idea about using data to basically facilitate transactions without burdening anyone with any friction is actually how we've approached our kind of, our view of how to do this business. And I think that basically if you can do that and create this thing that's very differentiated, to Amrish's point, you then can work with merchants to actually highlight the fact that they can have this deferred payment option maybe further up in the funnel. Because then if you can show, and we also have a 3-month installment version of Paidy, if you can show that you can basically do this interest-free split, instead of something being $300, it's $100 a month, like that's kind of the holy grail for a merchant, big, small, new, old, it doesn't matter, right? Communicating that value proposition to consumers, I think, is really important. And I think that this is this new emergent behavior, to Amrish's point, which is that as people start to have experience with these type of payment products and hopefully get habituated in them, in particular, if there's zero interest. I know in India there's a little bit of a mix, but I do think there's this other interesting global phenomenon, which is merchant-funded credit offers, right? So 0% APR to consumers. Obviously, as more people are shopping online, they're looking for more different ways to do what they want. And to come back to the question around data, for us, our philosophy has really been, you use data to remove friction and basically, give the consumer what they want, when they want it, where they want it. So Paidy works instantly, at the checkout page, at the time of checkout, when you're doing it, right? And it only works because there's a huge amount of data that we're able to leverage about that transaction or that consumer or all of these other things, sort of concomitant with what's going on. And we do it basically to just facilitate this magical, unbelievably fast and useful experience for consumers without them having to have done anything. So I think data is really key. Technologies are obviously moving all the time, right? I mean, we do a list of whatever, machine learning, blah, blah, blah. Almost doesn't matter. That actually the proof of the cooking is in the eating. And really like the whole purpose of the data is just creating these new consumer experiences, which people are obviously then just using more and more and more. So, but you can't do that if you can't underwrite risk, if you can't understand the transactions that you're facilitating. And obviously data is a massive underpinning of all of that.
I think you're giving a couple of I think you're giving a couple of great use cases there, and you also remind me a little of a really interesting quote during the year, a conundrum painted by Professor Chris Brummer at Georgetown University here in Washington, who talked about the challenge that's facing both big operators like financial institutions and also small fintech firms and the like, of how do, on one hand, I achieve economies of scale and at the same time achieve the level of personalisation and immediacy that customers have come to expect? And I think you make the point very effectively there, Russell, that there needs to be about the effective use of data as the key enabler to be able to optimise in both of those dimensions.
Yeah.
Arik, if I could turn to you, and you referred earlier to the role that platforms are playing in enabling small businesses to be able to launch into e-commerce easier than ever before. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more as to the broader landscape, certainly across Asia, of digital marketplaces. You mentioned a couple of them earlier, but perhaps if you could describe a bit more of the landscape for us and how that's allowing shops to go online.
Definitely. So first of all, marketplaces are a fascinating business, and I think they're responsible for a lot of the growth that we see post the pandemic. Especially in Asia, marketplaces seem to be the main growth engine of e-commerce. Over 50% of e-commerce volume in the region is generated by marketplaces like Lazada, Zalora, or local domestic marketplaces like Bukalapak. Their main value is in their size, audience base, right? As a seller, you get immediate scale and instant sales. Even big and popular brands now have virtual showcases of some of these marketplaces, which is quite, an amazing thing to see. However, relying on just one sales channel and strategy isn't something I recommend doing. If I were to lead an e-commerce company, I would be in a multi-channel retailer, not one-channel retailer. I would connect to marketplaces to get fast access to buyers and also build my own online presence and create my unique brand experience. One quick fact that I think is important to mention is that users in Southeast Asia compare on average 3.5 to 3.8 sources before they buy. So it's important to be discoverable and to be relevant. And here, getting a great checkout experience can be critical. And Rapyd, as a global payments company, basically solves for a lot of these marketplaces their ability to collect payments, and the checkout experience at the end of the day, I think, is one of the most important things, because you can have the best store and the most flashy marketing that will bring to you consumers. But at the end of the day, if the consumer gets to the checkout page and he doesn't see his preferred way to pay, and people mention here, variety of things like buy now, pay later, or bank transfers or wallets with QR codes. Every market has its own preferred way to pay. And especially in Southeast Asia, cards are not the preferred way to pay, right? Generally in Asia, it's less the preferred way to pay. And let's call it the European or American style checkout page of give me a 16-digit number with the expiration date and etc. is actually not a very good checkout experience. And I think that making sure that you know what is the best checkout experience for a specific consumer that is shopping with you is a critical element. And companies such as Rapyd leverage the data that we have of the millions of payments that are flowing through our platform in order to make sure that the relevant consumer that wants to pay on a specific marketplace or on a specific e-commerce website will get his preferred way to pay and not, somebody else's preferred way to pay.
It's a really, really interesting point, and certainly in the European and North American markets, we've probably been a little bit obsessed with things like our loyalty and frequent flyer miles and so on attached to our credit cards, and interesting whether that endures. We need to keep moving. Still got a lot more that we'd like to cover. So conscious of time, I might jump now into e-commerce and other commerce and how these intersect and react. Amrish, perhaps if I could start with you. And some people have called out the challenge of getting digitalised services to the last mile to the end consumers, to the end users and consumers. I was wanting to if we can get your thoughts on how well you think e-commerce solutions are now doing in this respect.
I think Arik has said this very appropriately, wherein more and more businesses are ready to go online directly from their homes, and the Shopifys of the world are helping them. But what we are getting to see is even platforms on WhatsApp are now coming up, wherein home entrepreneurs are able to publish their goods on the social media, allowing them to complete commerce. Now, obviously related to that is this whole space around delivery and whole space around payments. Payments in general has been the slowest, if you ask me, in the last mile and at the moment in the last mile. And that's back to the 3 S's, right? Which is around security, simplicity, and speed. Cash beats digital payments in all of these 3 when it comes to the last mile and payment transactions in the last mile. only in recent time when QR has come through, only in recent time where contactless acceptance has started to come through. You saw, I don't know if you saw this, but Apple actually acquired a company called MobiWay from Canada. And what that would do is on a regular phone, you can just get your card and do that acceptance. Now, incidentally, in the next 10 days, we at Pine Labs are going to roll out exactly the same solution across India. But with that product, what we want to do is we really want to target the home entrepreneur or the gym fitness trainer to start accepting money on their phones. So one is being able to put their commerce on the social channel. And second is being able to accept payments in a simple and a very secure manner. So things are moving, but I think payments are being a little bit slower than commerce.
Interesting. We'll certainly have to look out for that that new innovation that you referred to there that you have launching shortly. Arik, do you see e-commerce replacing in-person sales, or is it more a case of each of those sectors just moving increasingly into each other's spaces, perhaps?
I don't see e-commerce replacing, in-person sales that quickly. I think that people think that the world changed completely post the pandemic, but I don't think this is really the case because nobody actually likes to be quarantined or sitting at home and social distancing. People want to go out, and as soon as the governments will open up the doors, people will go out big time, right? It will take them some time to feel the confidence, and I think that in-person sales is going to jump back significantly. I think that what we shouldn't contrast e-commerce to the brick and mortar retail model. It's not binary. There are maybe more options, right? I think that the world of retail will reinvent itself, and we'll see a lot of hybrid models in the next few months. For example, just like Bukalapak's mom and pop physical shops, states became e-commerce operators. There could be some other creative options. For example, some parts of retail experience could be delivered to the comfort of your home, and technology and data will be enhancing these experiences. And at Rapyd, we have recently acquired a POS card acquiring company in Europe, which is called Corta. We did it because we believe that we live on the verge of an omni-channel era where online and offline will be interconnected and payments will be invisible but critical part of the seamless multi-channel experience.
Thank you. I'll continue with Russell. And Russell, what do you think the place is for physical retail in the future?
Yeah, I think Arik has hit the nail on the head. I think we're just going to move into much more of an omni-channel future. And I think the interesting point to tie back some of these other threads, and again, to kind of the Bukalapak approach to the world, maybe, like it'll be fascinating to see in it, if we have all the small businesses now shifting to being an online business, but e-commerce in general is also becoming this omni-channel approach to the world, it will be fascinating to see how people at that long tail end actually learn how to leverage data and some of the other different aspects that they're going to have in their business as those transitions play out for them. So definitely omni-channel. I think that makes a ton of sense. I think Arik has actually painted the vision exactly right.
So, Rachmat, I feel like all roads lead to you on this topic now. We've heard you brought in the term omni-channel earlier in our discussions, which Arik and Russell have both repeated. They've also cited the Bukalapak model perhaps as the way of the future. When you look at the kiosk business and the mum and pup shops, both perhaps facing the e-commerce threat, but also the opportunities where they are in a lot of cases facilitating payments and money transfers, how do you see them in the post-pandemic world as e-commerce and traditional retail start to blend perhaps?
Yeah, I think these mom and pop kiosk owners may have a bright future ahead of them if they can adopt to digitalization. I mean, I think Russell mentioned about even the countries like Japan is still very cash-based. So I think this idea of cash payment is probably still going to be around for a long time. And if they can adopt, they can basically have so many more services. So instead of on top of just general trade right now, we already started introducing them with basic banking services like remittance. We offer them all the payments, virtual products. So many more SKUs. And I think the holy grail is that if we can kind of connect the marketplace to them. So, and I think in a way they already start doing that. They order from online marketplace and they start selling in their kiosk. So some sort of like a social commerce activities, if you will. So I mean, I think this guy can probably sell from very small place, but they can have like millions of SKUs moving forward if they can adopt to this digitalization.
It's a fascinating model, and I think a fascinating vision for where we may head to as we hopefully get past the pandemic. In the time we have left, I want to talk a bit about the cross-border element, both in terms of cross-border data flows, facilitating e-commerce firms that are wanting to, or small businesses that are wanting to export. And I do so here with a bit of context from some recent comments that Ravi Menon gave when he spoke at the IF annual meeting last month. And he talked about the need for a digital Bretton Woods or something along those lines, that we have this increasingly fragmented world with things like the US-China tech tensions, which he attributed in part to the absence of a global rule book for the digital economy, and perhaps that we need to refresh a lot of those rules. And obviously, this is a topic that cascades through issues like data localization and some of the impediments to cross-border connectivity. So, Arik, I want to start with you, and perhaps, despite the trends of digitalization and international e-commerce, we do see some of these areas of increasing fragmentation, sometimes with data localization restrictions or the implicit or explicit support of local champions, perhaps. I was wondering if you could describe some of the barriers and perhaps some of the policy settings that need attention.
Yeah, so as Rapyd operates, across 105 countries, and we're actually almost everywhere in the world, and we've been there and done that, and we've seen almost everything that can go wrong or right with cross-border based payments. Some of the typical barriers we see are local regulators and compliance norms, especially when you operate in digital goods space. In India, for example, if you're a foreign digital service company, you need to approval from the Reserve Bank of India to do local cross-border payment collection, and there are some more examples to that. Another barrier is the extremely difficult to overcome is the fragmentation of payments, habits, and methods. We've managed to create a network of approximately 1,000 different payment methods, but until now, the biggest challenge that we're dealing with every day is the harmonization and normalization of these payment experiences, because everybody can understand a payment method in India with UPI is completely different than a pay now payment in Singapore, which is different than paying, with a bank transfer in Indonesia. And trying to create some kind of an harmonization for a technology company across all these payment methods, it's a very big challenge. I'd love to see the future, to open more opportunities for interconnectivity and standardization of payment and e-commerce norms. In fact, one of his, recent speeches, Ravi Menon, managing director of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, mentioned that the world basically needs a new version of Bretton Woods, the rule of the game for the international e-commerce. And when we all align on the same rules of the game, it will be easier to overcome those barriers and connect every customer in the world with every seller.
That cause of the global rulebook is definitely one that we at the IF want to take up, and I can see clearly that Rapyd is somebody that we need to talk more and involve in part of that process. Russell, I want to continue on the same sort of theme with you, and we discussed earlier about how the e-commerce trend has manifested itself in different ways in different places. And, I guess conscious of both the connectivity issues, but also some of those local trends. Interested in your sense of whether we need a global rule book for the digital economy.
Yeah, maybe I'll be contrarian just for fun. But, I think for me, it all comes back, as we've touched on this a bunch, all of us should just basically be in the business of facilitating consumers to do what they want. And now part of it is, as you say, educating them that they probably maybe want something different than their historical payment method or behavior or whatever, if there is actually something that really is superior for them. But I tend to have this view that basically the right way for these kind of best practices and norms to emerge, one, I don't think you should dictate to different people, how they should behave or why within reason. And different local behaviors. Arik's whole business, the reason that they have 1,000 different payment methods is not because somebody sat down and decided, but there is this fragmentation, and it's based on behavior and culture and other different idiosyncrasies in every place that exists. But I do think that people want good service, they want fast shipping, they want low prices. Like, these universals make a ton of sense. So naturally, you'll kind of go in that direction, but there probably is some role for regulation to, certainly I think the interesting one we haven't touched on is, crypto space, all of these things where it's actually already kind of removed from the ability for people to really kind of do enforcement. So, but I think my sense is, I don't think we need to have a global rule book as such. I think that basically what we need to do is service consumers in the way that they want. And if we have superior ways to do that, naturally, one hopes that behavior kind of goes in that direction. But I'm happy to have other people on the panel disagree. So there.
Okay. Rachmat, let's continue with you. And, I think where there are some of these fragmentary treatments or restrictions in some places, I know at Bukalapak, you've obviously been supporting Indonesian merchants who in a lot of cases have customers abroad. What can we be doing to help some of these small businesses that are wanting to export?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about like Indonesian SMEs in particular, export is already challenging even without fragmentary treatments or restrictions. Basically, I think issues are quite classic. Yeah, basically, first, logistics, it's there, but it's probably expensive. Payment, I think Arik and Russell already mentioned about that. It's hard to pay like for Indonesian goods from using foreign methods, for example. And also the SMEs typically don't have the capacity and capabilities to do export. Basically, they have limited capacity, and maybe the quality sometimes is not consistent. So those are, I think, first thing that we need to help out. Yeah, basically, introducing the quality, what is the foreign people wants, what kind of quality, and then afterwards we have the platform. For example, everyone can access the website, the apps, and we probably need to work with international payment companies to accept that payment as well. So there's a lot of homework even without restrictions, actually.
Well, I think you probably point back to a couple of the things that Arik had mentioned earlier, both in terms of the fact that consumers in different places might have different expectations or desires in the experience and what the checkout function might look like, but also the work in terms of being able to connect together the different payments innovations in different places to achieve that cross-border interoperability that helps to bring merchants and consumers together. Amrish, I'm going to give you the final word, and perhaps with the broader look forward, what stands out for you in the future of international e-commerce?
International e-commerce is obviously going to expand. However, it's a very, very tough area to solve for. What Rapyd does, what Adyen does is very, very complex. If you look at the meltdown of Wirecard, the most interesting part for me was the well-paid auditors really couldn't find out what the financial position of Wirecard is, because money is lying in different parts of the world. Nobody gets one single view to the financial position of one of the largest payment processors. The same problem exists across many, many different payment systems and across many payment companies. And that's because of three things, right? One, regulatory frameworks differ from one border to another. The cost of currency and currency conversion is extremely high, and that needs to be solved for. And the third piece is just the cost of compliance. When you put all of this together, plus the complex accounting which comes along with different markets, this is the problem to be solved. And I don't think so there's going to be just 1, 2, or 3 companies which will be unicorns in this space. I would think that there's going to be at least 10 companies which is going to be unicorns in cross-border e-commerce.
Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're hitting time. It's been a great discussion, and I would love to continue for longer, but we must respect the timelines. Plenty happening in the e-commerce world. I'm going to just very quickly recap on some of the things that stood out for me in the discussion. I really like the point that Arik brought in right at the outset about how it's never been easier to start an e-commerce business, particularly with the support of some of the platforms and marketplaces available, but that at the same time that payments has just become more complex, more complicated. Some of those interoperability issues we mentioned of all the different payment schemes and the work that's still there to be done in bringing those together by firms like Rapyd, for instance. Rachmat made a great point about educating people to use some of these new technologies and new methods, and in terms of what we've seen this year with the COVID experience and what that's meant with human adoption. Amrish, I really liked your point about the growth of credit, and in particular the growth of pay later solutions. I thought in particular the fascinating point you made that it's not just in the big malls and the like and the big box shops, but indeed in some of the rural and remote communities in India that there's been such enormous growth in that, and where that can be a really useful tool in particular for small businesses. And the other point I thought I'd stress is the point about omni-channel, and it was a term that we heard from Rachmat, but also from Russell and from Arik, and really where we saw this view of weaving together the thoughts of where e-commerce has developed, but also what the future of other forms of retail might be, and that it's not just necessarily traditional retail versus e-commerce, but indeed that there's not a binary scenario, but rather a series of different solutions that will likely emerge. So I want to thank all our panelists. It's been a fantastic discussion. I think a great reflection, but also a great look ahead. And I thank you all in the audience for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Brad. Great panel, guys. Cheers.
Thank you, Brad, and the panel of e-commerce experts.